Welcome, everyone. This is Maggie Fox. I'm the President and CEO of the Climate Reality Project. Thanks so much for joining us today for a very important and timely discussion on the cost of not acting as our climate changes. This webinar will be approximately 30 minutes long. After the presentation, we'll be opening up to questions that you pose on the chat bar. Our topic today is the issue of preparedness, or the lack thereof, of insurance companies as it relates to climate change. Why does this matter? Insurance companies, which exist, in effect, to pay out for damages caused by extreme weather, among other things, have been among the first to feel the heat, so to speak, and they have started revamping the industry for a future shaped by global warming. They are examining data on where extreme weather and sea level rise have hit, and looking at scientific projections about what comes next. That has led to spikes in insurance rates around the country, particularly for property owners on the coasts, near rivers, and in regions where extreme droughts have triggered wildfires and crop destruction. With this in mind, I'm delighted to introduce our guest today. First is Mindy Lubber, founding board member of Ceres, and she also directs Ceres Investor Network on Climate Risk, a group of 100 institutional investors managing nearly $10 trillion in assets, focused on the business risks and opportunities of climate change. Charlene Lurig is the Senior Manager for Insurance and Water Programs at Ceres and works with insurers and water service providers to build business models that are resilient to weather extremes, climate change, and resource depletion. I'm happy to turn this presentation over now to first Mindy and then Charlene.
Thank you, Maggie. It's a pleasure to be here. As Maggie said, my name is Mindy Lubber. I run a nonprofit advocacy organization that works to integrate sustainability leadership into some of the world's largest businesses and investors. We work with several hundred companies as well as Maggie noted, 100 large investors. As she also said, we're here today to focus on climate change and its profound implications for the United States industry, the insurance industry, and by extension for our overall economy. More specifically, we're discussing a new Ceres report recently released. It looks at what leading United States insurance companies are saying and doing about climate change. It is based on 184 company disclosures in response to a climate risk survey developed by state insurance regulators. The report's conclusions, as you'll see here in a moment from my colleague Charlene Lurig, are both illuminating and disappointing. The report builds on 5 other reports that lay out in great detail the financial risks to the insurance sector and what the opportunities are for that sector. Looking at slide 5, this topic could not be more timely given all that we're seeing every day on the news, in our newspapers, and so on. Across the board, we all know that wildfires, drought, heat waves, flooding, storms, and even freak storms are escalating, in large part due to climate change. Insurers invariably pay a big chunk of the losses from these changes in our climate, and as you can see from the map, they're substantial and they're everywhere. But of course, as we know, it's not only the insurance sector. There are similar costs to dozens of sectors across our economy, making it all the more imperative to act. Moving on to slide 6, worsening extreme weather events, such as the devastating drought and Hurricane Sandy, made 2012 the second costliest extreme weather year in the United States history, with $58 billion in losses for U.S. insurers alone. And it's no longer an odd year. Last year in 11, we saw $32 billion in losses just to the property and casualty sector of the insurance industry. While the industry is still no doubt profitable, we do know also that big name insurance companies such as Allstate, Travelers, Chubb are all suffering losses, and substantially so when they're seeing quarterly earnings reduced due to Hurricane Sandy. Slide 7 will show you that these escalating loss events have broader societal implications as well, because the insurance sector is a key enabler of the entire U.S. economy. If climate change undermines the future availability of insurance, something we're already seeing in Florida, where many private insurers no longer provide homeowners insurance, it threatens our overall economy and consumers as well. When insurers withdraw from markets, it forces the government to step in to provide this coverage. This creates a new round of huge liabilities for governments and ultimately for each of us, the taxpayers. The other option, of course, is no insurance at all, and that is even more destabilizing. This sector of our economy impacts the entire United States economy and beyond, and the insurance sector has a key role to play. Let's look at the results of this report as well as come back in our recommendations to what should this industry be doing to leave its mark, to be responsible about its own shareholder value, and to have an impact on this issue we call climate reality and climate changes that we're facing. Thank you. I'm now going to turn this over to my colleague, Charlene Lurig, the report's author, who will walk us through the report's findings and results. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. This is Charlene Lurig with Series Insurance Program. In 2012, insurance regulators in California, New York, and Washington State required insurers writing in excess of $300 million in direct written premiums that are doing business in their states to disclose their climate-related risks. And because virtually every large American insurer operates in at least one of those states, the survey responses give us a good picture of how well prepared the industry is as a whole for the risks associated with climate change. Next slide, please. What we found is that while there are some leadership companies who are taking concrete actions to manage climate change, they are in the extreme minority. Only 23 companies described comprehensive climate strategies. The size of the company, whether it was based here in the US or in Europe, were highly explanatory variables. So the larger the company, the more likely they were to have a strong climate position. 13 of the companies with comprehensive climate strategies were foreign-owned. Nearly all of them were very large companies. Yet even among those with comprehensive climate strategies, we found that the view of climate science is remarkably diverse. So while you have companies like Bermuda-based ACE, which is funding primary climate change research, you have companies like Swiss Re and others who are participating actively in efforts at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Companies, including Allstate and Travelers, are expressing very strong ambivalence about the state of the science, specifically the existence of climate change and what is causing it. Perhaps even more troubling, many insurers viewed climate change as a far-off risk to which they could gradually adapt their businesses. And many companies seemed not to even understand the difference between climate variability, which is the annual or decadal variation in extreme weather patterns that are part of a normal climate system, and climate change, the trends that are likely to emerge as the atmosphere and oceans warm due to human activities. And this is troubling because these companies are setting pricing and developing business strategies based on what they think the future will look like. But according to disclosure filings, it appears that many of them are fumbling in the dark, pricing risk without really understanding what causes it. Next slide, please. That being said, there is a small subset of industry leaders that are evolving their business strategies to remain competitive as the impacts of climate change unfold. Given the strong scientific consensus on climate change, the rest of the industry would be well advised to follow the lead of these innovative companies. Next slide. So let's take a closer look at two segments of the industry. The property and casualty side, those are the companies that write personal homeowners insurance, auto insurance, corporate liability insurance, and health insurers. Among property and casualty insurers, the most often cited strategy for managing climate extremes is defensive underwriting. They're adapting pricing to reflect increasing risks. They're increasing the number of exclusions for which policyholders cannot claim coverage. Those are techniques we're seeing all over the country in response to the higher losses from tornadoes, wildfires, and winter storms. Insurers are also withdrawing from high hazard areas, Florida being the most cited example of a market where insurers say they are no longer doing business. While many insurers are citing efforts to educate policyholders on the ways to reduce their chance of loss, let's say sending flyers on wildfire-resistant landscaping or hurricane-resistant windows, hardly any are engaging with their customers or with policymakers on climate adaptation. Many of the larger insurers offer specialty products encouraging low carbon activities, the most common one being rebuilding green following a loss, replacing an existing asset with a greener home, let's say, following a loss. But no insurers are describing activities like screening out clients for high carbon activities or pricing risk accordingly. On the other hand, the practice of excluding investments in high risk areas is quite common. So insurers are some of the largest investors in the world. They hold trillions of dollars of real estate assets and municipal bonds that finance our basic infrastructure. But like Nationwide Mutual, which is quoted here, dozens of insurers describe geographic screens to eliminate investment risk in regions with greater vulnerability to climate risk. And for communities with climate vulnerability, the combined effect of having less coverage available in the private insurance market and fewer investors willing to invest in their community could be a significantly diminished capacity to adapt to a future of more volatile extreme weather. So this is not just about insurance availability, this is about the ability to direct capital toward our communities that are rebounding from disaster. Next slide. The picture is unfortunately no better in the health industry, where the majority of companies view climate change as an issue that has no proven connection to their business. So despite scientific evidence of the correlation between higher temperatures, expanded territories for insect-borne disease, more frequent hospitalization for asthma, cardiac distress, even allergies, there's a disconnect within the industry. There is one very strong leader, Kaiser Permanente, which has itself committed to a 5-point climate change strategy to understand climate change, to assess and avoid climate-related impacts, to commit to continuous improvement, support industry standards, and inform public policies, but they are in the extreme minority. Next slide, please. It's clear from this survey that far more ground needs to be gained to keep insurance accessible so that communities are not bearing the full burden of loss. And among our recommendations for insurers is to elevate climate change as a matter of concern at the highest levels of the corporation, to exercise not just the ability to reprice to reflect changing risk, but to play a more effective role at helping their customers to manage risk so that they can continue to be insured against loss for the long term, to invest in research that's available for the public good for use by land use planners, by infrastructure designers, by policymakers on the impacts of climate change on human health and human systems, and finally to lend their voices to the call for climate action to prevent climate change through energy policy that reflects the real cost of carbon. With that, I'll hand it back to Maggie Fox, President and CEO of the Climate Reality Project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy and Charlene, for giving us a window into a critical body of work that all of you at Ceres are doing. And as I think Mindy noted earlier in our call, it's not just this report, but it's the accumulation of a long body of work showing what the cost of inaction on climate change is today. It's so much past the time when we need to face the reality of climate change and embrace the opportunities that it presents for a 21st century clean energy economy. We are wasting an enormous amount of time and massive resources in denial, and it's very clear that the insurance industry in the United States, through this report, is actually going to cost not just those individuals who are insured, but the entire American economy and thus the world. The images on the next few slides are from a new video that we released earlier this week called A Price on Carbon. This is a central theme of the Climate Reality Project's work this year, and we encourage you all to visit our website at www.climaterealityproject.org, as well as the Ceres website, to build up your information base for how much money we are already paying for the cost of inaction. In slide 17, we're going to take a look at just what the cost of inaction is in the broader context beyond the insurance industry in the United States. The companies that take the largest risk are the reinsurers, and Ceres works extensively with the reinsurance industry globally, those entities that effectively insure the insurers. Munich Re, the world's largest reinsurer, sees an increase of volatile weather in North America, driven in large part by climate change, as one of the greatest sources of risk to its bottom line. Their work concludes that natural catastrophes globally have more than doubled in the last 30 years, driven chiefly by an increase in extreme weather. In North America, the rate of weather disasters has increased nearly fourfold, costing more than $1 trillion over 30 years. But at the end of this story, and most important to understand, who is paying these costs? And that is us, all of us. We are already paying the price of carbon pollution. So it's past time to put a price on carbon, and balancing the equities make the polluters pay. It's time to move the conversation from the political world to where it has been for quite a period of time, to the personal and social. We need to talk about the true cost of carbon pollution, the cost that we are already paying every day, and bring this information to the top of everyone's mind. Next week, we'll be posting talking points on our website at www.climaterealityproject.org on how to have a carbon conversation. And we encourage you to come to our website and to go to CERI's website and put those talking points and the data of CERI's reports to work. Let's take a moment now to turn to some of the questions that we've received during the course of this presentation. Thank you all for participating, and I will pose the first question actually to Charlene that's come up on our chat board. Charlene, is the insurance industry 1 or 2 disasters away from going broke from climate change events? Should Americans feel immediate concern of industry going under?
I think this is really about the longer-term health of the industry and, by extension, of our economy. I don't think anyone expects that next year, should we have another Hurricane Sandy or a confluence of events like the tornadoes in the Midwest, that we will see the industry buckle. I think we have a well-capitalized industry. The challenge is that as companies compete against each other in an environment where every company is trying to move toward the same geographic areas that they view as being the least risky, the best to do business, the industry itself shrinks. And that's a problem not just for companies that are seeking to make a profit within the industry and their investors, but also for American communities who are seeking to have a reliable safety net from which to rebound from disasters. And we're seeing a very insidious trend of either companies leaving markets wholesale, like Florida, where you have the state of Florida now the largest insurer in that state through Citizens Insurance, but also a harder to measure, more insidious trend of homeowners, property owners, businesses taking on the burden of loss through increased exclusions in their insurance policies. So still being insured, but not really being able to claim that insurance following a loss event. And that means that our local communities internalize the economic impact of extreme events. And that's the challenge that we're facing.
Let me ask you just a follow-up question, and perhaps a touch unfair in the sense that it'd be hard to answer, but I think it's an important issue to raise, and that is, even today, as with just looking at Sandy, or which will be the 3rd year of drought in the United States, we're seeing this impact of partial insurance on many individual citizens. So beyond the impact of an individual insurer, you're talking about an economic impact in a community that is hard to even measure when people's lives can't be put back to rights, even over a period of time. Can you speak about that just for a moment?
Yeah, I think that's right. And part of the problem is because there has been a tendency within the realm of public policy to avoid this discussion of the real impact of climate change and how it's affecting Americans today. What we're seeing is a kind of de facto climate adaptation, which is not planned. It's not really designed by policymakers and individuals and communities in a way that promotes equity and that allows the economy and families and households to transition into this new future of extremes, but one that is entirely reactive, in which you have communities that are unable to rebuild because people simply did not have sufficient coverage of insurance for their properties and their businesses. And that is incredibly corrosive to communities and local economies. It's what we saw, say, in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
and it's not something that our economy really can, that's not the future of our economy or of our communities that I think we want to move toward.
Well, you make a good point, because as noted earlier, I think by Mindy, 2012 is the cost of insurance was the second highest, and that's because the highest was Katrina, another storm of massive proportions, the cost of which are still being paid today. So, Mindy, how about the next question for you? What are the two biggest steps you would like to see from the United States insurance companies, and where do you think they can make the biggest difference on this issue?
That's a great question, Maggie, and there are probably many ways. Insurance companies are the greatest risk assessors for our economy here in the United States and beyond. They know how to evaluate, diagnose, and assess risk. What we've seen over the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years, frankly, is climate risk is becoming clear. It's real, it's now, it's not 5 years or 10 years from now. And when insurance risk assessors, where most of our risk assessors reside or work, articulate what it is a risk that we're making an impact on and that we need to address, and they could then address it through pricing. That's crucial. So the insurers need to analyze the risk and be very candid and clear about it, and not only the Zurich, but all the insurance companies. It's inconceivable that one insurance company would reach that conclusion, but others wouldn't. So let's get that clear. But secondly, if I'm just being filtered to, policy changes are not foreign to the insurance industry. When there were earthquake risks, buildings weren't being built strongly enough in earthquake-prone areas. It was insurance companies that were out lobbying for and speaking out for, based on their own self-interest and society's interest, to have stronger building codes, and indeed we got that. When fire codes were being debated and building codes decades ago, it was the insurers that spoke out and said we need stronger fire codes, partially because they didn't want to pay larger payouts, and that's legitimate. They've got an obligation to their shareholders. But we need the insurance industry doing exactly that as it relates to climate. There are still too many people saying climate is not a financial risk, it's only an environmental risk. Well, we know with certainty that the impacts of climate are impacting every part of our economy. When we see floods ruining farms and droughts ruining crops, we're seeing billions and billions and billions of dollars of losses every single day. We need to factor that into all of our economic analysis, and insurers are chief to do that. And then they need to speak out and say that we need to address climate risk, and we need to put honest capital market signals in place. And that means pricing carbon, because it very definitely has a cost, as we've just been talking about for the past 30 minutes. So the bottom line is insurers should analyze the risk, and then they should speak out on public policy as a matter of their own future stability and as a matter of the future of our economy and, frankly, our children's futures at the same time.
Great job, Wendy. Can I ask you just another question that's come off of our chat board in the last few minutes? And why do you think progressive insurers like Swiss Re and Munich Re are not more able to leverage their oversight of direct insurers to convince the insurers to take increased action? What do you think the dynamic, how do you think that dynamic is operating? So, because you know, and have spoken eloquently about this, how the reinsurance industry has been one of the first industries in the world to own the reality of climate change. Why do you think they haven't been able to move their clients, if you will, to more direct action?
Well, first of all, the reality is some of the leaders are European-based. And as we know, not to get into the psychology and cultural differences, although culture is very important, issues of sustainability, of climate change, of environmental protection in Europe, where many of these reinsurers hail from, are embedded in society, are embedded in corporate decision-making in a very robust way compared to what's going on in the United States. And so there's a different debate and dialogue over there, even though the reality is climate change is an international debate. Reinsurers often don't want to tell their clients what to do. They want to be there to service their clients. They don't want to tell U.S. policymakers necessarily what to do, particularly if they're based in another country, because they feel like that's often not welcome. So they're capable of changing the debate. They're helping us change the debate in the United States. We've got a meeting with every leading insurance company next week in Washington to talk about just this. But they're a slow-moving industry that often is more responsive than taking a leadership role. And for those who have taken a leadership role, they've been more of a European-based group of leaders and slowly moving the debate and the dialogue into the U.S. economy. We are seeing changes, we are seeing progress, and I'm frankly optimistic that we will see more dialogue out of the insurance industry over the coming 2 years than we've seen in the last 20.
Thank you, Mindy. I think our job is actually to hasten that conversation, and thank all of you for joining us today. Looks like I get the last question, which is, you mentioned that we are all already paying the price of carbon pollution and that we need to move toward putting a price on carbon. Can you give us some examples of how that can be done? Absolutely. Thank you, whoever posed that question. We all know that climate change is happening and that the industry of denial is fast being overwhelmed and overcome by events occurring all over the world, including extreme weather. But when talk turns to solutions, we always hear the same refrain: we can't afford to do anything about climate change. Well, here's the reality. What we really can't afford to do is nothing. This report by Ceres and others that they have done and many other instances are proving to us beyond a shadow of a doubt that the cost of inaction is actually higher and more painful than moving forward with a clear set of solutions. For more than a century, fossil fuel companies have been freely polluting the atmosphere with excessive amounts of carbon pollution, while we are all together paying those costs. After years of paying the price of carbon, it's way past time to put a price on carbon. The basic idea of a price on carbon is simple. Ask dirty energy companies to pay for the carbon pollution that costs the rest of us so much. A price on carbon establishes an economic disincentive to pollute, and it uses market forces to encourage innovation and development of clean energy solutions. Already, the call for a price on carbon is gaining momentum around the world. Very recently, China has announced plans to introduce a tax on carbon pollution. South Africa will follow suit in 2015. Australia, just now emerging from an angry, brutal summer of record-breaking heat in which temperature gauges had to be redesigned to actually record the temperatures, has implemented its own carbon tax last year, and in the first 6 months saw an 8.6% drop in carbon pollution and growth in renewable energy use. And thank goodness, here in the United States, California launched this year what is known as a cap-and-trade program to establish a carbon price and give industry a flexible way to comply. And today, I'm excited to share that Los Angeles' Mayor Villaraigosa is announcing that his city will be the first big coal-free city in the United States. So change is not only possible, it's on the way. It's our job to actually speed that change up and bring the reality of carbon pollution into the voices in the communities and the conversation of Americans all over the country. We need leadership and political will, but as we've learned over the last number of years, that leadership needs to come from us as citizens with the desire to build the political will for this change. We need your help in leading and seeding a carbon conversation, getting these facts about the costs that we are already paying in large amounts of carbon pollution into your communities is key to shifting the speed and rate of change in this country and around the world. Thank you again to everyone who joined us today. The series report is one of many that they have done and will continue to do to educate all of us about the costs of inaction. For more information on this report and others, please visit their website at www.ceres.org, and please join us on our website for carbon talking points and for videos and other assets to share so we can seed and lead the critical conversation we need on carbon. Thank you all for joining us.